A special welcome to those joining us as part of the Share, Sustain, Shape events, and it's absolutely brilliant to see everybody here. A wee bit of contexting to the Praxis Lunches. As I said, they're jointly organised between myself, I work for CLD in Dundee, and my colleague Sarah McEwen at Dundee University. Prior to lockdown, we were having, one Praxis Lunch was hosted by the university, and then the next month we'd have it in a community facility. And it's open to absolutely anybody who is using a CLD approach to work. That's, volunteers, students, and CLD practitioners. We've covered a number of topics, including the work of Zygmunt Bauman, looking at living in an age of uncertainty, where we kind of watched a Bauman TED talk and then kind of broke into groups for discussion around that. And then we've looked at Margaret Ledwith, the input that Professor Margaret Ledwith gave at the World Community Development Conference in 2019, which was hosted in Dundee. And last month we heard from one of Sarah's colleagues, Dr. Alan Mackey from Dundee University, about his research for his PhD work with young people in Fife, which was an absolutely amazing session, and the level of discussion that followed was really, really good. However, we have never discussed the work of Paulo Freire, which is quite ironic, considering that his work and the books he's written, and he still appears to be the big guru, if I can call him that. So at this point, I'm going to hand you over to my colleague, who you won't see, but he's got a lovely picture there of him. He's having some technical difficulties. Robin Falconer, who's the community health team leader within CLD at Dundee City Council, and he's going to introduce the topic, and then we're going to break out into smaller groups and then come back together and just share some ideas following our discussion. Okay, right, thanks. Over to you, Robin.
Okay, yeah, hi everyone. So yeah, I just thought it'd be worth not setting too high in expectations before we start. So you've talked a lot of kind of high kind of key professors and etc. have been involved in delivering some of the content for the Praxis Lunch. So I'm here not as an expert, as I've put on this slide, and just delivering this session based on my kind of own reflection and experience, particularly from the community development World Community Development Conferences that have taken place over the last couple of years I've attended. So what I plan to do is just to share a few slides, which hopefully won't take too long, and then split into some breakout rooms, just to have a bit of discussion. So to set a bit of a context, and Gwen's mentioned about talking about Paulo Freire's kind of work, and I've mentioned that in the title of my presentation, but it's really up to you whether that's what you discuss or not. So I'm not going to be talking about too much about his kind of theories, but it's very relevant to the discussion that we'll have afterwards. I'm trying to move my slide on, but it's not actually doing that now. There we go. Yeah, so like I'd mentioned, so the inspiration for this session was based on my experience of the community development conferences, and it was from one particular workshop that I attended that, and to be honest, I can't even remember what it was even about, and it was very theoretical, lots of academic sort of concepts and theories that were being discussed, and it kind of made me think whether, in terms of thinking about praxis and how we kind of link and connect theory and praxis, how accessible is theory to CLD practitioners. So there's a kind of perception, I think, that my view anyway, that theory is sort of generated within academic institutions, within universities, colleges. Students learn about these theories at university, and then you go into the kind of workplace, and then you sort of either implement these theories or you completely forget them and think that, well, you're not really interested in theory that much, you'd rather just do the job. So I suppose the kind of purpose of these Praxis Lunches is to actually kind of recognise that the two are important, and the two need to be integrated as part of our work as CLD practitioners in order to benefit the people that we're working with. So, and the third point I've just mentioned on this slide here is kind of what this session is going to hopefully explore with people in terms of looking at, as well as practicing what you preach. So doing what you're basing your work on, kind of theories and your experiences of working with people in communities, also actually trying to articulate what you're actually doing as well is important and why you're doing it. So quite often we can potentially get kind of lost in amongst kind of complex pieces of work and we kind of get so far and maybe aren't really achieving what we're hoping to actually achieve. And so it'll be interesting to kind of hear your thoughts around that based on your own experience of working in whether it's local authority, third sector organisations, and how much kind of ability you have to really kind of critically reflect and build sort of critical reflexivity into your work and practice to improve outcomes for people in communities. So I think I've covered all of that. The last point there, so just I mentioned this session will just kind of help to explore the work that you're doing and to kind of try and articulate what you're doing, but also why you're doing it and all the kind of bits and pieces that actually result in change for people in communities. So, oh yeah, I forgot about this bit. So first I thought it'd be worth just, and I don't know if it'll work, is the chat available on Teams, Gwen, for people to type into? I just thought people could maybe type some thoughts first about what theory means to you.
Yeah, chat's there, we can use that.
Great. Yeah, so just if you just type a few thoughts, just and be honest. So like, what is theory to you, and what does it mean to you? So just really briefly type something into the chat, and I'll see if I can see it. Angie, how do I can you see the chat and read out anything that comes up, because I can't see it?
So just tap, there's a wee speech bubble that you can click on, but if I see anything I'll let you know.
I think that's been a bit of a tough one to start with.
Well, yeah.
We've got a language or framework from Robin.
Oh, sorry, say it again.
A language or framework.
Okay.
From Robin Donoghue.
Great.
Thoughts and ideas that stem from experiences and learning.
Great.
That's everyone's typing away now. Learning, research and experience, well, they're all picking up. Where's it gone? Which has taken place and it keeps jumping up the screen when I read it. Are you able to see the chats yourself, Robin? Have you got that?
Well, I think I might have to. I'll try and minimise this for a second and see if I can.
If not, I'll wait till it stops scrolling and I'll read you a few.
Yeah, here we go. I can see them now. Okay. Yes, there's quite a few there. So academic ideal about how practice should work and why. Yeah, so potentially an idealistic kind of circumstances. What have we got here? Yeah, making sure your work's grounded in theory, research and development, principle behind practice, and something to understand why we do what we do. Yeah, so these are all really kind of useful points, I think, that people have mentioned. What we do, how we do it, as well. Great, yeah, that's great. It's just to have some initial thoughts around that. So I'll just go back to my presentation. So, okay, so here are just a few kind of points that, again, this is my assumptions as kind of perceptions that people might have about theory. So first of all, some people kind of have this view of theory as it's just boring stuff that's not really that exciting. And so if you think about, particularly if you've had experience at school or things like driving test theory, it's all this kind of like written stuff that's really, it's like you have to do it, but it's really not that interesting. And so there's a risk there that if we make theory too complex and it can turn people off really trying to apply it in their day-to-day work. Second, so an idea about something that someone's made up, which is often unsubstantiated, but nevertheless is intriguing and may lead to something useful. So sometimes, again, people can use the term, say things like, oh, I have a theory. You have a theory that the world is flat. And it's kind of these vague kind of ideas that people have that can quite often be based on sort of just assumptions and kind of a gut feeling about things, which is okay, but you kind of have to sort of do something with that to actually really work out, is your theory does your theory stand up to what you're actually saying? So that's the last point here I've got, and I've tried to kind of connect this to various things I've kind of looked at just to put this presentation together. So, and I think people have probably mentioned these. So a method that helps to give us some understanding about things and ideas and concepts and practice. An attempt to explain something that we observe or experience. So if you think back to sort of experiential learning cycle, Cobb's experiential learning, which I'm sure people are familiar with, it's kind of about that kind of experience and how you then make reflect on that experience and then change your practice as a result of that. We can change theory and we can also add to it, so it's not a fixed thing. We should be kind of constantly building on our theories that we develop in our practice and creating new theories. So again, that's a kind of key message I'm kind of looking to get across in this session, is that as CLD practitioners, it would be useful if we can be active theorists or theorizers, whatever kind of term you want to use, rather than just sort of passive recipients of academic sort of concepts and theories. And finally, it has purpose and it's well thought out, so it's not just this kind of unsubstantiated ideas that people have. It's based on your experience, the research that somebody mentioned in the chat. But I think acknowledging that it's subjective, so depending on your view, probably from a CLD perspective, we see theory as being something that's sort of socially constructed. It's not something you can necessarily prove or disprove that you might see in sort of more kind of scientific type positivist research approaches. So yeah, that's just 3 points that I've kind of thought of. So some of these questions I'm keen to explore today are how much in our day-to-day work as CLD practitioners or CLD managers do we experience what I've called following sheep syndrome. And I've got nothing against sheep, and I'm not trying to patronize anyone by saying this, but it's just to kind of ask. In this picture here, we've got sheep who are all heading in a same direction, but we all think the person at the front knows where they're going, but in reality, they don't really know where they're going, and they think the person at the back knows where they're going. So I suppose the question is, how often do we stop to ask why we're doing what we're doing, and are we potentially stuck in a routine of doing something because we have to? Maybe it's something that your organisation has specific priorities, or there maybe are political priorities that you have to work to. You're doing it because it's just you're expected to do that in your work, or maybe because you've always done it. Maybe you've worked in a role for quite some time, you've done things and it seems to work, and people have given you good feedback from the groups that they've maybe been part of, but in the end we don't really know necessarily why we're doing it, and is it really addressing some of the kind of root causes of social injustice and inequality, and I suppose what assumptions are we making as well about what we're doing. Finally, I was just repeating I think what I've said. So are we doing things because they seem to work, so we get this sort of feeling, or maybe feedback is positive, so we deliver a group and the participants in that group say, yeah, that was great, I got a lot out of this, it built my confidence, it increased my skills, increased my knowledge, but how has it actually done that, and how do we then use that information to improve our practice going forward? So I've got another sort of analogy here of the washing machine, and you've probably seen this, and everyone will be really familiar with sort of planning processes that use sort of inputs and outputs and outcomes, and it can be sometimes a bit kind of confusing and unclear about the differences and between sort of things like outputs and outcomes. And if people have attended the recent evaluation workshops, it probably this kind of builds a little bit on that. So the washing machine analogy that I've put forward here is that to clean your clothes, you put dirty clothes in, you put detergent, you put water in, you put electricity into this washing machine, and then something magical happens in the washing machine. You can't really see it. You can see the thing spinning around, the drum spinning around, it makes noises, you can hear the water swishing around, but you don't actually know the actual mechanisms of what's actually going on to clean the clothes. You can make some assumptions about that, and you can develop your own theory about how this washing machine works, but until you've actually gone into the washing machine and pulled it apart, you can't actually really say for certain that this is how it's actually working. So what we see is that what comes out of the washing machine, so hopefully clean clothes, so that'll be kind of equivalent to our sort of outputs in our work. So this is the kind of things that have actually come out of the activities that we deliver. And then also between the outputs and then the outcomes, so we're through this process, we're maybe hoping that people will be happy and more confident because they've got clean clothes to wear, but there's something between the outputs and the outcomes that we also need to explain as well. So if people, so if the clean clothes come out of the washing machine, why is it that clean clothes are actually making people happier and more confident? And maybe some people prefer dirty clothes and maybe like to get muddy and don't really like clean clothes. So it's important to understand what's happening at that point as well. I'm just hoping you're kind of maybe relating this to work as well in CLD. But just to show I'm not just kind of randomly come up with a concept here, it's realist evaluations, a useful sort of concept to look into. You might be already familiar with this, and generally what realist evaluation is to explore the kind of mechanisms that make our work actually have an effect in the first place. So it builds on this washing machine analogy. We deliver activities in communities to local people. We've got this sort of black box mechanism here in the middle. So there's something that goes on in the middle here when we're delivering things, and then it produces outcomes, which are either we've achieved something or maybe something hasn't worked. But again, like I said, until we unpack the reasons for why we're doing what we're doing, we can't really work out what we need to do in the future to improve our practice, or we can't actually articulate the reason that we are doing what we're doing, and the reason we're continuing to do something, or the reason that we are changing what we're doing. And all of this kind of exists within a wider context, a sort of micro, meso, and macro environment as well. So how does people's sort of family circumstances impact on whether something works for them or not? How does their sort of local community environment impact on whether a CLD piece of work has an effect for them or not? And how does things like underlying social inequality, poverty, etc., impact on our work as well? So it's kind of been like realistic about what we are actually able to achieve from the work that we're doing, and to unpick these kind of mechanisms. So I don't know if that's hopefully that makes sense a little bit. So I've got a bit of an activity now, and the activity is just to split into some small groups and to have a think about one specific activity or a type of activity that you're involved with, or have been involved with in your work as a CLD practitioner, and to try and articulate what that piece of work actually does and why it works, how it works, and for whom it works, or if you don't think it does work, why is it not working? So some of the key points to think about are the purpose of the activity. So why is it that you're actually delivering it in the first place? Like who has decided that this piece of CLD work is actually a good idea in the first place, and what's your justification for doing it? What are the practical elements of this piece of work? So what are you actually seeing happen? What are the kind of physical, tangible parts to what you're delivering? But also, what are the unobservable mechanisms as well? So what do you think, for example, if you're delivering a health and wellbeing group, you're delivering lots of sort of maybe some information sessions on how to improve your health and wellbeing, you're doing maybe some craft activities, you're having a chat as a group. So these are the kind of practical elements, and at the end of the group you might have lots of people saying, yeah, we've developed our confidence, we've improved our knowledge and our skills, but so what, and how has that actually happened in the first place? Like how has the work that we've done resulted in that impact for participants? So it's just to kind of unpick that a little bit, and then also just think about how the context you're working in affects the work that you're doing. So hope that makes some sort of sense. So I'll stop talking there, but if there's any questions before we start, then feel free to add them to the chat or ask. I'll try and help.
How was that? How was the discussion in each of the groups? Did it last the 20 minutes or did people struggle? No, good discussion. Level of discussion. Good. Getting the thumbs up from Sue there. Robin.
Hello. Yeah.
Hello. This is like me standing with a tin can with a string at one end.
This usually works okay for me, but not today.
Right. Is it back to your presentation, or do you want feedback from individual groups initially?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we don't need to go through every group, but just maybe any group that feels you kind of had a really kind of good discussion around sort of the kind of questions that I'd asked around sort of mechanisms and what you're doing, why you're doing it, and how it all works. So our group, like I know that, like for example, Jill was talking about her sort of CV. Well, maybe you can say yourself, Jill, but quite interesting was that the sort of CV kind of course that Bill's been going with the group, and we kind of looked at it's not just about the kind of CV writing that's actually having the impact, it's the whole kind of social element and the participants that come together and they boost each other's confidence and self-esteem, and so that's kind of like the things that are maybe the kind of what's the word I'm looking for, underlying sort of beneficial mechanisms that are making that group work, so which justifies that being done in a group setting rather than on a one-to-one basis. So yeah, just things like that would be quite good to hear from people.
Okay, I'm going to pick on somebody. I'm going to pick on Hazel Bell. Could you give us a wee bit of feedback from your group, Hazel? Just a couple of words.
Thanks.
Okay. You're welcome.
Well, I ended up with Eamon and Mary, who both just started studying CLD.
Okay.
Eamon's first year, and Mary's doing, I think, the postgrad work-based. Having been an experienced youth worker for years, so I'm not sure that we stuck to the question necessarily, and I didn't want to do all the talking. So, but I was asked questions about how targets came into the conversation, about targets. And I was asked whether I'd seen a difference in how it used to be, so more of this kind of thing. And I said, oh yeah, absolutely, but you don't interpret targets always as numerical things that are negative. Targets can be, so COP26, a target could be how well are we kind of engaging young people around environmental issues, or a target can be the government's desire to enshrine within rights the UN rights of the child. Didn't quite manage to do that, but they're clearly saying they want a country where young people feel they have a voice. So, and then we talked about how in Mary's work and to a certain extent literacy, to a certain extent a lot of CLD when it's provision based, you're responding to need and you're changing individual lives. But how well are we actually, so Mary talked a lot about young people with mental health issues, and doing an amazing job with young people in schools, but how well are we shaking and challenging the system around, well, why are so many young people now struggling with mental health issues, and what is the wider society actually doing about that? So we're really good at responding to need, maybe not as good as Freire would. Freire might be wagging his finger and saying, you need to give these people more of a voice and create more, impetus and movements around the issues that you're responding to. Is that right, Mary?
You're on mute, Mary.
Yep, that's kind of where we got to, yeah.
Yeah. Listen, thanks for that, Hazel. Does anybody want to come in there or have any questions to that particular group? No? No hands up? Oh, Kirsty, go for it.
Not a question necessarily, but a kind of observation from what Hazel was saying there, and back to Robin's image of the washing machine, and what happens once you put the stuff into the machine and before it comes out, something happens there. And thinking about, you know, what Hazel was describing and the washing machine, that's the disruption that we cause as CLD workers. And the washing machine is probably a really good analogy for that, because it does rumble things up and knock them back and forward. And, you know, I used to use a baking analogy for the inputs, outputs, outcomes, but actually the washing machine is much better because it's much, in that bit, it's much messier, it's much more all over the place and disruptive. And I think that's what we do as CLD practitioners.
Yeah, that's so true, Kirsty. Good analogy there. Any other groups wanting to volunteer to go next for eyeball people?
We were talking about I hate a silent room, sorry. We were talking about how theory is scary, how like we maybe shy away from it, like when we got to the conclusion of what we'd been talking about, we were like, have we come up with theories? Have we actually like addressed the question? And in some ways we did, because like the things we were talking about, it adopted different theoretical perspectives without pinpointing a specific theory, but in terms of going, this is a specific theory that we were discussing, and putting that to the practice that we implement, possibly not, but like I don't think you can. And the practice that we deliver, we always look to draw on different theories, and a lot of the time we do that unwittingly, even before we've even learned about theories. Like if you're a youth worker that's maybe not went down that educational route yet, you're practicing in a way that draws on theory without realising it. And then when you do learn about it, you're like, oh, light bulb moment, and it kind of draws it together, and it pulls everything in. Sometimes it improves our work, sometimes it like challenges our work. But yeah, I think we had a really good discussion around it. Whether we answered the questions, I don't know, but I think we did in a roundabout way.
Do you know, that's interesting what you say there, Megan. And we are CLD practitioners. We do things quite intuitively, don't we? You know, and we don't always, you know, you're talking about what we term unqualified staff, and I remember when I became a student after being a volunteer for a good few years, you know, and going and picking books out the library and reading stuff and thinking, God, that's what I think. That's where I was coming from. And that was just so reassuring for me, you know. And I wasn't thinking about it in terms of practice. It was more about the approach to the work I was doing. And I just remember thinking, this is incredible, you know. Somebody else has written about this. It's in a library in a university, and that's what I believe. Anybody else want to come into Megan's comments there? Any questions? Look, even in preparation for today, I went and got out can you see that? Paulo Freire, Pedagogy of the Oppressed. And it's a very, very old copy. And then his other one, Cultural Action for Freedom. But I wondered how often we revisit these things after, you know, you do it as part of your course when you're at university, and then, you know, these things get put away in a cupboard as mine did. And how often do we sit and look back at the books that we've got? Sue, your group, do you want to come in here? Any comments, observations?
Yeah, we had a really lively discussion, as you'd expect. It was really good. So some of the things we talked about, and we talked in terms of sort of context. We were talking about we were talking about Afghan refugees resettlement. We were talking about a gingerbread group of single dads. We were talking about women attending a stand-up comedy course. I mean, it was really wide-ranging in the sort of topics that we were talking about, which was fascinating. One of the things we talked about was the unexpected outcomes and the kind of you sort of put your inputs, your outputs, and you think you know what you're going to get, but quite often you don't. And we talked about how those are very personalised, or to the individual learner, and that very much depends on the context that Robin was talking about, what else is going on in their lives and in the community and so on. I mean, what we try and do then, Jackie pointed out, is that we try and then sort of think, well, I wonder what happened there, let's try and recreate it another time, if you get a particularly good unexpected outcome, so you would then try and create a theory about it and try and build that into your planning for the next time. We also spoke about the need for us to challenge our own assumptions about learners. So we'll make assumptions maybe about where we think they're starting, but that might not be the case because they've got so many layers of experience and things like that we don't know about. So it's that kind of, we need to challenge our own assumptions, both where they're starting and also where they might end up. And it's that kind of magic bit in the middle that happens that we don't really know what's going to happen. But a lot of that, I guess, is about that kind of critical awareness that maybe we start to stir with people, hopefully, where they can start to challenge their own situations and think, so I think particularly in terms of the groups we were talking about, that was certainly true. And sort of a final point was about outcomes being set by funders that are not always realistic. So that was the gingerbread example, where the needs of the group were such that they had very basic needs, and Mandy spoke about Maslow and kind of they needed food and they needed to be able to get through the weekend on their electricity and things like that, and that maybe wasn't relating to the outcomes that the funders were looking for, so that involves some renegotiation with funders there. So that's a wee sort of flavour of some of the things we spoke about.
Thanks, Sue. Does anybody want to ask Sue any questions of that group? I'm interested in, now we've got a wider kind of body of people attending today. Do people have kind of time for reflection? I mean, do you have secured time within your workplace to reflect on your practice? I know that some local authorities kind of set aside, allocate time for people just to reflect. I was just throwing it out there because we've tried in Dundee to think about a specific time which doesn't necessarily suit all workers. Lorraine, you wanted to come in there.
Yeah, my observation just was that, Gwen, that we have dedicated time on a Wednesday morning. Right. And do you know, see whether you're in the mood to reflect critically or not, that's when you do it. And I suppose for me as a community worker, I'm going to buck against that every time. But because see, sometimes things that happen on the Tuesday night need to be sorted on the Wednesday morning, and I'm in no mood to critically reflect when I know that I have got X, Y, and Z to do from the Tuesday night. So I suppose for me, the opportunity to do it, I welcome. Yeah. But as a community worker, I've been told that I need to do it on a Wednesday morning. Is the bit that just doesn't sit with me. I'm grateful that my service have said this is important, but it could be important on a Thursday afternoon as well, but if you haven't, so I think we need to kind of tease that out a wee bit about when, because that just doesn't happen. It's like reading in me. I'm not a great reader, but when I have the notion to read and I don't know why it happens, if it's the moon, I read then. Do you know what I mean? And one of the things for me about coming on this thing today was I just feel, and it's my own doing, a wee bit of a disconnect from that. It wasn't even this century that I graduated. I know I don't look it, but it wasn't even this century, and I kind of feel that it's just been, for me at the minute, I'm just feeling that I'm kind of missing a lot of stuff. Yeah. Just maybe with the academic, and I just feel a wee bit, and I kind of said that, I was on a thing the other day as well, I just felt a wee bit distant from being CLD again. So it's been, I'm grateful for this. We didn't write any theory in our group, I had to go for a wee so I missed our feedback, but that's okay as well. But we do in Fife have that opportunity to do it, but I just think being told when to do it has just kind of missed the boat a wee bit, and sometimes I can't focus on a Wednesday morning because of other stuff.
No, Lorraine, that's great. That's been really helpful because, you know, same thing. Some people have designated times when you do it and you're supposed to kind of switch on and off. And is it a team effort? You know, do you all do it together as a team, or is it you as an individual?
So to be fair, Gwen, it was introduced, Susan, correct me if I'm wrong here, Susan's a Fifer. It started before COVID, and it's only ever been on my own.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? So, and then COVID came in, and obviously the whole thing went peak-tong anyway. So, somebody mentioned it a couple of Wednesdays ago, and I thought, oh, I've never started that back on a Wednesday. Do you know what I mean? It's a dedicated time. Sometimes sometimes I prefer to do it kind of later in the day rather than first thing in the morning, because you check emails first thing in the morning, and then at 10 o'clock you've got to reflect and everything else, and you think, oh my days. You know, that's just how I kind of find it anyway. I don't know.
Absolutely, totally agree. Megan, you wanted to come in.
Yeah, I was thinking about that there, and it made me think of, was it? So I just give a wee bit background. My supervisor, he's a probably met her, Vicky Wilson.
Yeah,
she does the training for youth workers and stuff. So they were at this meeting around getting practitioners back involved with evaluating their practice. And they were talking again about this reflective thing, about having the time to reflect, and and the same thing come up over and over again about like not having the time, having too many commitments, and there not being enough hours in the day. And she said something, and it really stuck with me, and she said to them, and it made the room go quiet actually, she said, well, maybe we need to think about not doing or delivering as many projects at one time. Like, yeah, we might want to be like delivering a specific amount of like projects, but realistically, within the hours that we have and within our job roles, like, can we really deliver 4 projects when we could maybe take that down to 2 and give more to that, and more of yourself and more of your time, and more that like enrich the practice more, and produce more reflection, time for reflection. And I thought, you know what, that's really interesting, because I bet most people don't do that, because we go into we start employment and there's this total drive to keep working as many, like, and fitting all these things into the hours of the day. And because we're community educators, we go, yes, I'll do that. Yes, I'll help with that. Yes, I'll do. And we don't give ourselves enough time of the day. But actually, like, when you're asked, like, can you do that? Can you not give yourself all the hours of the day dedicated to this practice? Can you give yourself some time to actually reflect? We probably could, because a lot of practitioners have that, like, you know, they're in control of their own work basically, so they can take that back. They can go, right, actually, maybe that is too much for me to handle. Maybe I can take that project away, or maybe I can designate it to somebody else, or ask somebody else to take it on, and then have time for that. But
absolutely. I don't. Yeah.
Is it realistic? Who knows? Like,
yeah.
But,
well, we'll need to give Vicky the thumbs up for that one, because that was a good point, well made there, Megan.
I'll say, yeah, I hope she's all right with me bringing that up, but I think she will.
No, it makes perfect sense. Did you want to say something, Moira?
I was just going to add in that I find it with my team, we tend to reflect holistically, you know, as things happen. And I think I would find it quite hard to allocate Wednesday morning for reflection, because something happens on the Thursday. Do I have to wait till Wednesday before I can take the time out to do it? And I used to have quite a long commute to work, and that was the best part of the day for in the morning, getting in the zone, thinking, okay, my to-do list. But at the end of the day, it was reflection, it was going through things. So by the time I got home, I was just ready to relax and enjoy. So I think you have to take a variety of approaches to it.
Yeah. Kirsty, did you put something in the chat there?
As you would expect, I did a plug for a CLD Standards Council resource. Yeah, I just put in the link to the definition of the competent critically reflective CLD practitioner. So the link's there, and that links in with our values as a profession, our competencies, and our code of ethics. So all of those combine to create the competent and reflective practitioner. So links in the chat.
That's good, thank you. Robin, do you want to come back in here?
Yeah, I can. Yeah, it's been really interesting. I think just listening to what everyone's been saying, and I suppose, like I said at the beginning, that that the session was kind of more based on my own kind of reflections, and tried to kind of get people's kind of perspective on theory and how it's used. And I suppose it's just kind of highlighting the challenges. And I suppose my theory for kind of running this session is that it will help us to kind of explore how we use theory in our practice. And I suppose in a similar way to the purpose of the practice lunches is to try to do that. But in reality, what changes that actually having for us as CLD practitioners, in the same way that we might question what impact is our work with communities having. So we've had this discussion, and people probably get really frustrated with doing loads of kind of reflective discussions, but then they go back to the reality of the real world, and then it's how you fit that in, and that's an issue that's been talked about for quite some time. And I suppose and people mention about set time for actual reflection, and maybe that's not really how it actually works. But so I suppose my question is for for everyone is how we actually then, what do we do? Are we just going to keep on sort of talking about the challenges of this, or is there something that we can actually change, or do we just need to acknowledge that it's difficult? And so yeah, it's just some questions around that. I've got my slide, just a few more points just on the end of it, if you want me to just pop that up. Is that okay?
Yeah, can you do that, or can Angie do that? Angie,
can you? Right, that should be it, is
it? Yes. Yeah. Yes, that's it.
Yeah. So just to summarise, so for me, I suppose it's like, as CLD practitioners, people probably like kind of theorise, or at least kind of reflect on a day-to-day basis. You just don't kind of consciously think, right, I am now reflecting, I am now developing a theory as to why my work's actually working or is not working. So I suppose the risk is that if we don't sort of acknowledge that and record our kind of thoughts, that they do become sort of just passing thoughts and potentially judgments and assumptions that are just there and nothing really happens with them. So my view is that if we articulate theory in our day-to-day work, and I suppose just, it doesn't need to be complex theories, and somebody mentioned about kind of specific kind of theoretical maybe concepts. It doesn't need to be as much as that. It can just be a case of, like I'd mentioned in the realist evaluation, about explaining not just what we do and what it actually achieves, but what's in between those 2 points in that kind of washing machine that I'd mentioned. It could probably help people become more critical thinkers by actually doing that, and they're just by understanding the mechanisms that will result in a shift from saying in your kind of evaluative work, well, this worked and this didn't work, to actually saying, well, these parts worked and this is why they worked, but these things didn't work because of these reasons. And then finally, praxis to me is active theory, not passive theory. So I think in the summary for the session, I put in, if you search in Google just for a definition of praxis, there's loads that come up, and one was just about, it's just about linking theory to practice, but it's not. It's about actually the two working together. So yeah, it's been really interesting, I think, to hear everyone's perspective. And I suppose just going forward, I suppose my question is, so what now? What? How are we going to build this in?
Thanks, Robin. You know, it's been great to to be part, this specific Praxis Lunch to be part of, and I'm going to say the 3 S's because I've forgotten what they stand for, programme, but everybody is more than welcome to join us. We meet on, as I said, a monthly basis, and during lockdown it's been on Microsoft Teams, which isn't ideal because you can see today we've had a few technical hitches, but for everybody that's present today, please come along. We could make sure, I'm actually going to suggest to Sarah that we use Eventbrite and advertise the future Praxis Lunches, because the level of discussion, Lorraine, you hit the nail on the head when you said, you know, we don't get enough opportunities, and I agree with you, to reflect on our practice with fellow practitioners like this. I mean, in Dundee, for example, I've added, and Kirsty, I get top marks for this, Kirsty Gemmell, added the professional learning onto what constitutes professional learning onto the back of our support and supervision notes. So, you know, there's obviously going to be a dialogue between a senior and a worker that they're offering support and supervision to. And
but Glenn, can I just say that although I'm saying we don't get enough time, I think it's like when folks say, what's one of the problems, and folk will say communication. I hate that as an answer, because we're all responsible for communication. Communication is people for me, do you know what I mean? So what I would say is there is time to do it, work to be done. We just need to take a wee bit more responsibility. I'm not blaming anyone for that, do you know what I mean? And like I say, in Fife, we've made the opportunity. I don't, because I'm quite happy with how things are, but yeah, and it's about ourselves. I know, Rob, at the beginning, one of the best things I have been involved with in the 20 odd years that I've been a community worker was the event up in Dundee, you know, the community development conference. A great experience, and for me, just a really good time, you know, in my professional career, just to say it really started me thinking again. And obviously we didn't get long after that, and then COVID, but I just think I'm still kind of invigorated by that. It was a really good event, if anybody else managed to get to it, and I think for me that's been the start of things for me personally and professionally, so that's been good. But it's difficult just to fit it in, Gwen. And the thing about outcomes, when people discussing outcomes and stuff like that, is it's a bit of a bugbear for me, outcomes. And you know, when you go to an application form and they want to talk to you about the outcomes, and there's like a huge bit, and I put one thing in, I'm not afraid just to put one thing in. You know, I think we're driven by the outcomes, and sometimes that kind of ends up conflicting everything then, and you end up having to put too many in because that's a big bit, and I should write lots of outcomes because they're obviously looking for lots of outcomes. And I just think I'm putting one down that I know this is what we'd like to achieve, and that's I'm going to hang my hat on it, but sometimes that doesn't go down well.
Anybody got any comments to add to what Lorraine said there? No.
It's okay if you don't. That was the rant over. That's been my reflection for the day. It's Thursday. It's not even a Wednesday.
No.
Not so much about the outcomes, but just about, like, for example, I do work in Fife, but I work 18 hours, so I don't work Wednesday. So reflection does need to happen in our job, but it needs to happen when it suits. I mean, if you offer flexible working, then it's got to be done flexibly, and not every, you know, part-time post works the same hours as well. So, and like Lorraine says, it has to. I mean, you're a constant, like, reflective practitioner, so it happens all the time anyway. You can't just say, right, okay, I'm going to do it on the Sabbath. Do you know what I mean? Like, that just doesn't happen. But I do think it could be put into, like, your CPD, like, you know, there's maybe like 10 hours that you need to complete a year or whatever. It could be, you know, a suggested hour a week, and you can put that into your diary, and if anybody's looking to see if you're contactable or whatever, then, you know, they don't contact you at that time, and that time might change every week. Do you know? But it could be
and I worry, Susan, that maybe what we did in Fife was, you know how teachers have like protected time, you know, non-class contact time, and that happens and they get that, and I wonder if some people have thought, well, you know, teachers have got that, we want to have that for our staff. I know. And want to do it, but I just, you know, it doesn't need to be the same time every week. That's the point. I know teachers get that dedicated time at a specific time every week, and somebody covers. I mean, there's another thing, when I'm reflecting, who's covering for me?
Yeah.
No, the other thing is it's not just our reflections, it's our whole teams. So quite often I will then be supporting the reflections of one of the team members who doesn't work, you know, in such and such, and maybe works at a time that I don't work, but I'll pick up the phone anyway, or vice versa. Do you know, we've just got a wee support system that works for us, but it certainly doesn't fit into a certain day of the week at a certain time, do you know. So I think, yeah, we just need to be a wee bit more realistic with that, but I think it's a really good thing that it's there.
Yeah, thanks. Sunniva, did you want to come in?
No, sorry, I'm having a slight childcare fail.
I was concerned that I missed some of the points you wanted to make. I think that's a really good point, Susan, you know, about part-time staff. I know Kirsty Forrester, one of our ESOL seniors, is here, and she made a comment earlier around the ESOL. Where is it? Oh, I've lost it. No, I've lost it, sorry. Yeah, we've set aside Wednesday too because we do a lot as Tayside and 5 ESOL network. It's a pain from a timetabling perspective, but the time to come together across the region as practitioners is really welcome. That's Perth and Kinross, Angus and 5 all seem to have the Wednesday morning for that. Yeah, we don't have that protective time in Dundee, and it's interesting hearing your comments about, you know, whether you use that time wisely or not, or whether you're in the mood for it or not. But I like Susan's idea of just, you've got to be disciplined yourself. Let's face it, you know, this is important. Then this is an important aspect of our work. So we should be setting our hour or whatever a week into our diary, and you'll just looking after ourselves that way, which will be music to your ears, Kirsty Gemmell. Professional learning diarised for every week. I'm conscious of the time here. I just want to say again that you're all more than welcome to join us next month. I cannot off the top of my head remember the date for our Praxis Lunch in December, but we're always open to you know, suggestions. You know, Robin picked up the mantle again today. Robin's done it a couple of times and just, you know, did a bit of research and did that presentation today, Robin, which I thought was excellent, and thanks very much for that. If there's topics that people are particularly interested in, and it doesn't have to take the form of a presentation, it could be a TED talk, we've done that before, or it could be a piece of research. Tends not to be the kind of highbrow theory, because we want people to come back. So it tends to be, as I say, a bit of a, you know, introduction by way of a bit of film, or you know, just a few slides, and then the discussion is, for us, is the most important part of it. It's really the time well spent.